I did not expect Donald Trump to flip 10 counties in California from blue to red. But I guess I shouldn't have been surprised about that either, because when you look at the conditions that people are living in a Democrat-controlled state, well, yeah, you can understand why people are turning their backs on the Democratic Party.
This is just insane to me, because if you look at states ranked by poverty, infant mortality, crime, gun violence, the red states are dominating in these bad conditions. So here are the states ranked by poverty. Number 1, Puerto Rico. Number 2, Mississippi. Number 3, Louisiana. Number 4, New Mexico. Number 5, West Virginia. Number 6, Kentucky. Number 7, Arkansas. Number 8, Alabama. Where the is her smoke for these red-controlled states? Anna Kasparian went on Glenn Beck to ostensibly talk about how the left has gone crazy or some such thing.
We are living at such an exciting time. Everything is changing.
True.
And strange times create strange bedfellows. More and more, I find myself sitting down and having actual conversations with people who even just 5 years ago would have never thought to talk to me or me talk to them in a million years. But things have changed in a good way. And people on the right, people on the left, and the people somewhere in between or nowhere at all are starting to agree, hey, we have problems and we have to stop this political division before it destroys us completely. Christmas is coming up and you'll probably be getting together.
I wish I had a sizzle reel prepared of Glenn Beck calling Democrats and people like me like Satan worshiping godless communists, because I'm sure such a sizzle reel could be produced if we had enough time.
Here soon with a family member who voted differently than you.
It's not. So my issue is not like I can have a conversation with conservative people. The issue is not the divisiveness. The issue is the very nature of the information systems that we all intake. And right now, it seems as though in the MAGA world, they live in, from my perspective, obviously, a reality that is just totally divorced from the actual circumstances and relevant facts. And, you know, that is going to cause divisiveness. Now, you can find some examples, or even many examples, of people on the left that say and do kind of crazy shit. Like the most recent example would be the guy in New York who was acquitted of manslaughter against the man that was killed after he was put in a chokehold. You can see some people on the left trying to make this an issue about race. And when you look at the facts of that case, it's pretty clear that the guy wasn't trying to like murder a black man because he was black. There was a black man on the subway that was actually trying to assist in subduing that guy. The guy, Neely, the man who died, had gotten onto the subway and was threatening to kill people and was showing signs of aggression. And I mean, it was a tragic thing that happened, but did this, former Marine try to murder this man because he was black? No, probably not, right? There was a black woman who said she felt threatened by that man, who thanked the Marine for doing what he did, for stepping in to try to subdue the situation. I mean, it's not like you can't find examples of rhetoric that's kind of stupid and divorced from the facts on the left, but it seems to have been elevated to a really unique degree in recent times when we're talking about MAGA people. Like my conversation with PKA, like every time I try to have a conversation with those guys and I just say something that is just a plain fact, something that is plainly true. People got mutilated on January 6th. A guy got his eyeball poked out. A guy got his ribs crushed so bad that he had to go into early retirement. A guy got a part of his finger chopped off. They literally kidnapped 1,400 kids at the border. When you bring these things up, it seems as though there's a lot of people out there that just they're not aware of any of these things whatsoever. But anyways, I digress.
Can you bring that back together? That old friend that you had, can they believe that you're not a fascist or a communist? How do we maintain the vision of e pluribus unum? How can we come back together?
I wouldn't feel comfortable speculating that a majority of Trump's voters, for example, are fascists. I think a more appropriate description would be that they got conned. That's my take on that. Like, I don't think that these people are out and out fascists. There are some that are for sure, but most Trump voters, I would highly doubt that. I could be wrong, but
I think we can. To test my theory, I am joined today by a prominent political commentator from the left side of the aisle. Welcome, host and producer of the globally popular.
in my YouTube chat, Kasich says, Hutch, you're so wrong about the vax. Please do a debate on this with someone who disagrees and isn't a loon. My Discord is open, so if you want to argue about the vax or whatever you want, hop in my Discord, jump in the change my mind room, and you know, we can have a conversation, I guess.
Popular online news show, The Young Turks. Anna Kasparian. I can't wait to talk to Anna, and I hope you listen to this entire conversation because I think this is really important. And we're going to talk about abortion. At least I have it on my list. Let me talk to you about preborn. The left would like you to think that every woman who gets an abortion magically gets happier. And some people on the right want you to believe that they're magically evil. I don't know the people who want to shout their abortion. That is evil. But the truth is, women are trapped and babies die. And the only way we're going to change this is by changing people's hearts and their minds. The Ministry of Preborn is fighting for moms who are deciding between the life and death of their unborn child.
The Ministry of Preborn.
First thing they do is they introduce the mom to their child on a free ultrasound. That doubles the chances that mom will choose life. Then they show those babies and mothers God's love by providing additional assistance for up to 2 years, because many times these moms feel trapped.
I'm seeing studies right here, just a cursory Google search. 95% of women who have had abortions do not regret the decision. That's just one data point. I'll look at some other ones and see what I find here.
Trapped and alone. Right now, you can make a big difference. At the end of the year here, your tax
84% from UC San Francisco. There's a Pew Research poll. I'm not seeing anything about regret here.
deductible donation can be the difference between life and death. $28 will buy an ultrasound. $15,000 will buy an ultrasound machine. $5,000 covers the entire thing for a day throughout the country. Not know who you are. How would you describe who you were? Because you've had some transition on some things, who you were, how you would self-identify yourself over the last 10 years.
Progressive.
Well, I would say that I was firmly identifying myself as a Democrat. I think that if you look at my policy prescriptions, for the most part, I'm still pretty much left-wing. There are some social issues
Hold on. Definition of left wing to you. Is that Democrat or left wing? What does that mean?
Well, left wing in regard to, you know, I would say like one of my grounding political values is that workers should have better pay, better working conditions, a seat at the table. Unionized labor, I think, is incredibly important, which, you know, it's something that's been decimated in recent decades in this country. But that's like my number one interest in politics. And that's not really something that has really been favored by the Republican Party, traditionally speaking. And historically, unionized labor was something that the Democratic Party looked out for. And I don't really see that as the case anymore when it comes to the mainstream Democrats. They're certainly more corporate now. They're certainly captured by their corporate donors. I think that the way that this last election went down really does show you the kind of political strategist rot that exists, the corrupt.
Does anybody doubt that Joe Biden was the most pro-union president in modern history? Does anybody really doubt that? What is the argument against that?
Corruption that exists, and there's real tension now between the voters who want very specific policy prescriptions in order to deal with the rising inequalities that we have in this country when it comes to wealth and income. And then you have the Democratic Party, which is heavily funded by corporate interests and moneyed interests. And what those donors want severely conflicts with what the base of Democratic voters want. And so
how does that square with, say, appointing Lena Khan to head the NLRB? So how do you reconcile these two things? So if Democrats have become beholden to their corporate donors, then why did we get such a wildly progressive head of the NLRB? Why was the Biden administration so pro-labor throughout his entire presidency?
So this has been a growing issue with the Democratic Party. And what I see as, their campaign call is more and more culture war stuff. And it gets more and more extreme every election cycle. And
this is just not true at all. It kind of reached its crescendo in 2020. And I think you could say that was a result of the pendulum swinging far to the left. During the Trump presidency, he was a very sensational, galvanizing, controversial, antagonistic right-wing force in this country. And that provoked a massive swing to the left, to the extent that we saw people on the debate stage in 2020 taking positions that even a majority of Latino voters oppose, like we should decriminalize border crossings in this country. And so there was pressure from liberal donors who tend to be more progressive than the median voter to push these candidates to adopt policy positions that were sort of broadly unpopular. But that very much died down after the 2020 election. It didn't go away entirely, but we saw the Democrats strike a more moderate tone in 2022 during those midterms, and certainly in 2024. We all saw the obvious evidence that Kamala was very aggressively pivoting to the center. And so this idea that the Democrats have just been getting more and more and more and more extreme over the last couple of decades, you can't really square that with the 2024 race. Doesn't really make any sense.
I think that they're pushing more and more people away by sticking to the corporate politics while also getting more and more maximalist when it comes to some of the culture war type issues.
So as I look, because it is so hard, what you do, what I do, there's so many words that come out of us every single day, and then out of context or not worded, exactly right. The way I look at the Democratic Party or the left is that there is the machine that is in bed now with big business. And that's just the crony capitalism, just the
oh my God, it's just so rich coming from, Donald Trump had Elon Musk, literally the wealthiest man in the world, personally contribute how much money to Donald Trump's campaign through his various PACs? $250 million. Donald Trump is staffing his cabinet. It's the richest cabinet literally in the history of the Republic. There are like 7 or 8 billionaires serving in his cabinet. I don't understand how Anna just sits there and nods when she hears Jenks say this with a straight face. It's just so insane to me.
Vomitous kind of corruption that we all hate in either party, any party.
Right.
Then there's the average Democrat who might disagree on taxes or whatever, but they believe in the Constitution and they believe in the Bill of Rights and everything else. And I think that has been that is the majority of people.
Absolutely.
And then there's this crazy left-wing Marxist, destroy it all kind of group. And that, I don't even know, maybe 8%, 10% is that. And it's the middle people who have been either lied to so effectively by so many people, mainly mainstream media. But we're at the beginning in the Democratic Party, possibly, of those people waking up and going, I don't like either end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I take a little bit of issue with the use of Marxist in this context, because honestly, I think that there's maybe a total of like 5 actual Marxists in this country. In reality, we're talking about individuals whose politics is mostly based on, some fringe issue or some cultural issue that they have. It's not just that they care about that issue, it's that they've taken that issue and they've made it part of their identity, the core of who they are. And it's almost like what you would expect from religious zealots, and so there's a fundamentalism involved.
How much pushback should we give establishment Dems for letting the little bro lefties unhinge the conversations? I would want you to get into specifics, but I feel like the Democrats have definitely taken steps in recent years to distance themselves from the more destructive elements of the left wing. I feel like I've seen establishment Democrats actively try to push the crazies out of the party. They did it with defund the police in 2020. They did it with some of the more deranged college protesters on campuses throughout this last year. I think a majority of Democrats in the House signed on to a piece of legislation that criminalized some aspect of those protests. I'm not really quite sure, but the specifics of that bill. But we have seen Democrats that have taken steps to differentiate themselves from the actual like anarchists, Marxist, Leninists, et cetera, et cetera.
The way that they treat these issues, and there's no room to negotiate. There's no room to maybe consider the thoughts and concerns of other individuals. And so as they become more and more kind of like authoritarian in what they demand, they are pushing people away. And there are some issues in which the rights of one group might actually end up conflicting with the rights of another group, depending on what type of legislation you're pursuing. And so, of course, this has come up with the trans issue. And I've always been supportive of the transgender community, but when the rights of transgender people, particularly transgender women, start to cause some tension with the rights and freedoms of women or the perceived safety of women, well, let's have a conversation and avoid assuming the worst of the people who want to have that conversation, right? Because I think that in a country like America, where you have so many different people with so many different backgrounds, beliefs, people of faith, the only way this works is if we respect each other and actually engage in these conversations in good faith. And I felt that the left was able to do that back in the day. And I don't know what happened, but we've moved further and further away from being able to have those conversations in good faith without assuming malice toward individuals who have a slight difference of opinion.
So
to be clear, I don't necessarily disagree with her there. There are people on the left in this country that take a very maximalist position on everything. And if there's any kind of slight divergence from that position, then they're labeled an enemy. Like the fact that, you know, when I was having the conversation with Ogre Boy the other day, for example, like me and him should not be enemies. We should not be screaming at each other. We should not be bickering and you know, this kind of thing. And from like 2016 to 2020, when most of the attention was put on Trump, there was a lot more solidarity between liberals and leftists during that time, because there was just kind of one enemy to focus on at the time. And boy, did that just kind of blow up in flames past 2020. And I remember during the Trump years trying to sort of build bridges, because I recognized those like fractures, those differences of opinion. And in my mind, I naively thought that we could have like a unified coalition in this country that could bring together those two groups. And I was just wrong. Like, there are some like complete unhinged, deranged freaks on the left, and they're super destructive. They're harmful to the coalition. They hurt our prospects in elections, and they don't seem to care about victory. They have no priority whatsoever placed on actual electoral victory. There's just no sense of like, well, we have to win elections. There's just, you know, when I was speaking with Ogre Boy last week, for example, he made it clear that, you know, to be a leftist is to be permanently losing. And he was just, and I couldn't understand that when he said it. I was like, what do you mean? To be on the left is permanently losing. Don't you want to do something about that? Like, doesn't power matter at some point? But these people are not beholden to those kinds of standards. Like, to them, if they lose elections over and over and over and over again, it's a sign that they're morally superior. And so they don't really have any inclination to do anything about it. Losing elections reaffirms their own belief in themselves of like moral and intellectual superiority. And those people are really, 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 really harmful, in my opinion.
I mean, well, let me just ask you first. Do you believe in the Bill of Rights?
Of course. Yes.
All of them?
I love this country.
Yeah, I know.
I love this country. I love the idea of this country.
Right. I'm not questioning. I just want to know, do you believe in the Bill of Rights as written? Mm-hmm. Okay. That used to be our unum. We could all come together and disagree and live different lifestyles as long as I'm not taking away your rights, you're not taking away my rights. I have a right to disagree with you. We can have conversations about anything and walk away and go, see you tomorrow, Bill. You know what I mean? That's what's happened to us. There's been this erosion of education of how important the Bill of Rights is. We're looking now at a population, especially a younger population, that thinks that there's limits on speech.
Right.
There's not limit.
There are some limits, right?
What are they?
The typical example is you can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater.
Not true. That was actually written by the Supreme Court to prove against that.
Really?
Yeah, it was not.
But you can't incite violence.
Yes,
you
that's
can't
true.
engage in defamation.
You can't say things that directly incite violence or panic.
Right.
And it's very clear when, we're going to go kill them and we're going to kill them now. That's the end of freedom of speech.
Right.
But without freedom of speech, where we can't say, I'm sorry, I respect this person, I love this person, they can live their life, but if I'm taking them to the hospital, I am telling the doctor that's a man, not a woman. Now, they can call themselves whatever. I could even be totally cool with it, but we have to be able to have a civil, non-hateful conversation about truth.
I mean, I agree with you on that. And, the argument, and I think this is a decent argument.
The issue for me is that so much of the anti-trans stuff on the right is motivated by religion. It's motivated by religious conservatism specifically. And he can say that it's not about hate, but I don't know, man. When you start telling people that they're an abomination, they're an affront to God, that they've been, overtaken by Satan, I just have no patience for that malarkey.
That you'll hear from those who are more restrictive or wanting more restrictions on speech is,
yeah, like what's stopping you in that spot from telling the doctor that it's a trans woman? Like why would you jump to man right there? Like that seems unnecessary, right?
Oh, if
you tell a doctor, oh, they're a trans woman, then it becomes clear, what's going on there, right? But if you take the step to misgender someone, then to me it's more personal. To me it's more of a statement about, like, it's less about, wanting adequate care for the person that you're taking to the hospital and more about asserting your worldview on that person.
Want better terms of service when it comes to, private companies, but free speech only has to do with the government. And if the government isn't violating your free speech, then why are we complaining about,
That's not a problem if the government's not in bed with all of the business. You know what I mean?
Interesting. What do you mean by that?
Republicans used to be the big business people.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And
I think they still are to a large extent.
Yes.
I think remember we talked about those.
They still are. It was Donald Trump who cut the corporate tax rate from, what was it? What did it used to be? Like 32% down to 15%? I can't remember exactly how much he cut it, but
the three with Republicans, there's that machinery Republican. They're all in bed still. They're all in bed. That section, I hope, comes to an end, but there'll always be those people. So I agree with you on that. But it was when you're in bed, especially now, I don't know how you define fascism, but fascism, the technical definition of fascism, is a public-private partnership with the government and private industry. Communism doesn't let you have private ownership. Fascism says, no, you can have private industry, but you're going to do it our way. And we'll let you have the company. And if you don't want to do it our way, we'll destroy you.
That's an element of fascism. He's right about that. But there's a lot more to fascism than just that, right?
Oh, take it away from you or whatever. We've been headed that way for 100+ years. Both sides have been doing it. Right now, the public-private partnership where the government says, we can't do this, but you can. That's fascism. That's wildly dangerous.
I would love some specifics here.
And both sides have a propensity to do that because they both like power and both like control and money. But because of social media and Google and everything else, we are in a situation.
Yeah, it's like saying Catholicism is eating crackers and drinking wine. Yeah, there you go.
To where who's controlling?
You can't just change the definition of fascism. No, I mean, he's not wrong that in fascist states that we've observed throughout history, government has exerted a total control over the private sector. So he's not wrong about that. But when we're talking about fascism, there are more, I would argue, important or distinguishing elements. So a cult of personality around a charismatic leader, scapegoating of minorities, whether it be racial or sexual or religious or ethnic, or and then totalitarian government, hyper nationalism. Like, these are all, I would argue, probably way more relevant to the definition of fascism than the government or the power structure having complete control over the economy, essentially.
Which one is more afraid of the other, the government or Google? Who's afraid of who? You know what I mean? Who has more power?
Well, I would say right now it feels as though the corporations have more power.
I agree with you.
Especially considering the fact that, corporate interests fund politicians on both sides of the political aisle. And so they're
okay. So this would be a good time, if I was Anna, to press Glenn and be like, okay, would you support some kind of a measure to extricate big business from our political system, to, highly regulate corporate lobbying, overturn Citizens United with legislation or a new Supreme Court opinion, or I would love to hear what Glenn Beck's substantive plan to disentangle the political system from our markets, from our business, from our private sectors. What's his actual plan to address these things?
Completely captured by corporate interests.
Correct.
And I think that has happened to the detriment of the American people, regardless of whether...
Like other countries, for example, they have a public fund that political candidates use, and both candidates get the same amount of funds. And, what they do with those funds is up to them, but it's sort of like a level playing field. And in America, we can have these super PACs and PACs that can funnel tens of millions and hundreds of millions of dollars into political campaigns, because it's essentially this like giant loophole. If you're an individual, you can only contribute, how much is it? $3,500, I think maybe, is around where the cap is for individual donations to a political party or to a political campaign. But if you form a political PAC, all of a sudden now you can give 25 million to a candidate in Texas and 36 million to a candidate in Florida, and it just f***s everything up, right? Like, this is like the perfect example of big business having an oversized influence in American politics. And so what would Glenn Beck's plan to address this problem be? And my thesis is that he probably doesn't have a plan. This is all bullshit, right?
They vote Democrat or Republican. And so what I see as a bigger problem when it comes to this speech question and how it's impacting private companies is that private companies are increasingly catering to niche audiences or one side of the political spectrum over the other. And unfortunately, and I understand this because I think I was also kind of in that bubble of seeking content or information that only validated what I already believed. Because
Chauncey in YouTube chat says, right now it feels like, quote, right now it feels like, end quote, is the anthem of this election cycle. Dude. Yes.
It's comfortable. And I totally understand why people...
It feels like crime is at an all-time high. It feels like inflation we're at record levels of inflation. It feels like we're in a recession, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
People do that. I used to do that myself. I didn't do it consciously. It was like a thing that I think I was just doing because it's like, I trust this source because this source is reporting accurately. But it turns out, no, I actually trust that source because that source is telling me what I want to hear.
Correct.
And if you're MAGA, it's like, it feels like trans people are abusing kids all over the country. It feels like Democrats are Satan worshipers. It feels like, et cetera, and on and on and on. It feels like there's a real threat of communism in America. feels like Donald Trump won the 2020 election. There's nothing to base that off of whatsoever. There's nothing that can point to say, that's what happened, but that's what it feels like, right? So
this is a huge problem because the divisions in the country and the inability,
excuse me,
because the divisions in the country and the inability to have conversations with people you disagree with, I think is a product of the bubbles that we live in, right? The media bubbles we live in. And I don't know how to fix that. I mean,
am I crazy? Am I insane? Or does it feel like this is just a made up situation? This idea that people that don't agree with each other aren't having conversations with each other, that feels kind of made up to me, right? Because I see it happening all the time. I see people having political and cultural debates with each other 24 hours a day. I'm sure it happens in the workplace. Like I don't go to work. I don't have coworkers, but for the people in chat, how many of you guys witness or participate in conversations with people that you disagree with politically? Like, are these conversations not happening all over the place? They're definitely happening on social media. They're definitely happening on the news media. It's everywhere. It's the theme of the country right now. There's just these deep divisions. I would be willing to entertain her argument, but it just doesn't feel sincere to me. It feels like people are disagreeing with each other constantly. There's a constant state of tension in this country.
One way that I've tried is by providing counter narratives and a different point of view or playing devil's advocate on TYT. Or more importantly, if I've changed my mind, I want to be as honest with my audience as possible.
You have to.
And living in Los Angeles, living in California, which is completely controlled by the Democratic Party, it has allowed me to see some of the flaws in the policies that the Democratic Party is pushing for on a more national scale. And I don't want that to happen if I've experienced some of these policies and they have not worked out so well. But what's interesting is the resistance to any of that critique that you'll see from, not everyone in the audience, not even the majority of the audience, but there's always that very loud minority of people who demand that you only tell them what they want to hear.
I know.
And validate what they already believe.
Or you're a traitor.
Or you're a traitor, exactly. Yeah. Or a grifter.
I think, one of the things, I love that one.
Yeah.
I was against Trump in 2016, very vocal about it.
I remember.
And I was a traitor and a grifter. I was just trying to make money. And then he did some things that I said he'll never do. And I agreed with the policies. And I had said, if I'm wrong, I'll admit it. I did. And I was a grifter and a traitor again. I mean, it's just, there's no way to win. More with Anna here in just a second. First, we're all getting older, and I don't know about you, but there's been a sea change. We're at the very beginning of it, but it's strange. I was just talking to Donald Trump. I was doing a fundraiser at Mar-a-Lago.
Humble brag.
A couple of days ago, and I said, I think we're like the cool kids now. I've never been at the cool kids table.
This is wild. I look, I'm going to pause.
They may have in the case of this election, a plurality of support in this country, but it's just difficult for me to imagine religious conservatives who want to impose their worldview on the rest of the country. I just don't think they're ever going to be the cool kids. Maybe we're in a moment right now where it's kind of cool and hip to be like, well, the media lied about Trump and blah, blah. And there's like a defiance to MAGA. And I think that's kind of one thing that defines quote unquote cool is like a sort of defiance. You know what I mean? And right now I feel like there is sort of a defiance to being MAGA and to being a Trump supporter. But we'll circle back around to this in a year and we'll see if it's still cool. I have my doubts. Maybe he's right, but I have my doubts.
On saying the cool kids.
No.
But I will say this.
But we've never been even near the cool kids. We're at we're in the hallway of the cool kids table. You know what I mean? I know that, but we've never, and he said, YMCA. How is YMCA suddenly cool?
It's not just about.
It's not. It's cool at Trump rallies, I guess, but
that, Trump.
But But hang on a second. Like, YMCA has been a pretty culturally relevant song for a really long time. Like, it was all over the place when I was a kid. They played it at sports events and this kind of thing. And I feel like they've never stopped doing that. So in a sense, I feel like YMCA has been cool or whatever, or at least culturally relevant for like 5 decades, you know?
Trump is, and the audience hates when I say this, but it's just demonstrably true. He's funny. He's an entertainer. I mean, he was an entertainer before, you know, he was a politician, that's for sure.
That's what also causes trouble for him.
It does. It certainly does.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think the reason why you're feeling how you're feeling about the perception of the Republican Party now versus, you know, in the Bush era.
Hang on just a second. I don't want to say Republican Party because that's not cool. That'll never be cool. There's this new coalition of Trump, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK, Elon Musk, people that are coming from all different points of view. It's the way America that I grew up in. It's the way America was. We disagree on a lot, but we have one central vision, and that is, in this case, end this corruption, end this nonsense. Yes. Right?
Yeah, no, that's a great way of putting it. And you know, the CEO and my co-host, Cenk Uygur of the Young Turks, he is really trying to bring like a populist coalition of people together, you know, and individuals, basically Americans who see the rot in our political system thanks to the corruption. And so it's been his top issue ever since I've met him. And so he's been trying to get money out of politics. So these politicians actually represent what the people want, as opposed to what a small group of corporate executives want. And I think that's really the key in fixing what's broken in our political system. The other thing is, I mean, look, members of Congress really should see themselves as public servants as opposed to individuals who are elected into office just to enrich themselves.
All of them should be.
So we have to ban their ability to trade individual stocks. I mean, this is madness that they're able to do this.
Ban the trading of stocks. Do not allow them to go into any business that they had any regulation or anything for at least 10 years.
I totally agree.
This revolving door is obscene, absolutely obscene.
Don't think he's necessarily wrong about that. I don't know if you can constitutionally ban people that serve in government from having stocks. I don't know if you can do that. I would love to. Maybe I'll ask Pisco the next time we do the pod what he thinks about that.
I say this kindly because I've been on the other side of the table, and I wish people had given me the benefit of the doubt of being a decent human being and actually meaning what I say, because I do. So I say this believing you're an actual decent human being. Okay.
Okay.
The one thing that I look for in people who say, I've seen the light, is I know when I've changed, and I've changed many big points of view and many big things in my life, but I can tell you what color the carpet was when I had that epiphany. I can tell you the time of day. I can tell you everything about that moment because it was like, holy mother, I'm wrong. And time stopped and you remember it.
Right.
If you're sincere.
I don't think that's necessarily true. I think for some people, change comes slowly, and especially if your career and your life depends on a particular identity, a particular outward identity, you're going to resist internal change. And you're going to resist and resist and resist until you can't resist anymore. That's what I feel happened with me.
Okay, so wait. So then what was, I think we might be saying similar things because it's not, the heavens didn't open up.
Right.
You all of a sudden go, I can't do this. I can't say this anymore. So was there a time, yes, it happened slowly, but was there a moment that changed you and said, I can't do this anymore. I can't do it anymore.
I mean, I would say the phrase I can't do it anymore, for me,
I'll tell you what, I had a moment like this. There was a moment like this, and I'm not here to like rehash old shit, but I had a moment with my audience about 4 years ago, maybe it was 5 years ago, where there was intense pushback from longtime viewers of the stream, longtime subscribers to the stream. There was intense pushback because I had very sparse, infrequent conversations with Destiny. And I hesitate to call it just pushback because it felt like more than that. And I had a moment of realization where I was like, this feels a bit much, you know? And I was feeling this pressure from my own audience to villainize this person that I viewed as imperfect, but not a villain. I've taken issue with some of the things that Destiny has said over the years, but I largely align with him politically. And I think if you look below the edginess, there are some very fleshed out logical underpinnings to his thought processes, his beliefs, and his arguments. And I've always respected that about him. And I would have these conversations, and there was just like, it reached this head where there was like so much like tension in my community about it. And you know, people were fighting about it in the Discord, and it was like a whole thing. And it ultimately led to a lot of these longtime viewers parting ways with the stream, which, you know, I respect. I'm not going to tell people like, oh, you should, if this stream is not serving you, or even worse, if this stream is like toxic for you, or if this community is for whatever reason, then hey man, everybody should do whatever they need to do to take care of themselves. But like another thing too was I used to make jokes about guillotines. This is like peak like Trump resistance era, like 2019, 2018. And I would make jokes about guillotines, you know, allusions to the French Revolution and whatnot, but I wasn't like a literal tanky. And then I started noticing that some people in the chat were like unironically suggesting guillotines. And I was like, wait, we were joking, right? Like there was a moment where I was like, wait, some of you are being serious about the guillotines. The ACAB stuff, I always hated the ACAB stuff, you know, like, listen, my family is just full of cops. One of my sisters is a cop, and I know my sister, like I am 1000% sure that she is a good person, that she absolutely gives a about her community, that she gives people the benefit of the doubt. She's not a bastard. She is one of the cops. Like she's an investigator for the district attorney now. She moved up in the world, but she was a cop in her community for like, you know, 10, 15 years. And I kept on having these conversations with people. I was like, nope, every single one of them can burn in hell. And I was like, Jesus Christ. Basically everything kind of came to a head in 2020, you know, which kind of makes sense. There was a lot of tension. People were stuck inside. People weren't really, you know, I get it. You know, we weren't at our best in 2020, but the ACAB stuff always drove me insane. I felt afraid to push back against some of the people that were like completely justifying the rioting. And that's one thing when I look back on 2020, I kind of regret that I didn't push back more. Because looking back at the time, I made a conscious decision to not push back on some stuff because I felt like there was going to be a lot of blowback. And I decided somewhere in the last like 5 years that I'm not going to do that anymore. So if it means like alienating some people, then okay. But yeah, there was a lot. There was a lot of, and there still is a lot of purity testing in leftist spaces. And in so many ways, I feel like it's just gotten so much worse. And I keep talking about the Ethan H3 Hassan split. I keep harping on that, but to me, that's just such a fascinating kind of online cultural moment, because looking back, it's like obvious that was inevitable. It was inevitably always going to reach that place. But the fact that Hassan's community excommunicated somebody who was totally on board with condemning Israel and Netanyahu and the war and the bombing and was totally on board with all of that, like totally, sincerely. But because he didn't favor a one-state solution, essentially, was what it boiled down to. But because he didn't want the state of Israel to dissolve itself, they pushed him out, like almost violently. And it was just, so from my point of view, that whole thing has just gotten so much worse. The purity testing from that, like toxic, some people call them the dirtbag left. I feel like it's just gotten so much worse, but yeah.
Applies to a handful of policy issues that the Democratic Party has been championing that I don't agree with.
So there's no personal, there was no personal event or anything that happened in your life to where you went.
I mean, I was sexually assaulted by a homeless guy. Right?
Okay.
Yeah, I was sexually assaulted by a homeless guy in Los Angeles in my neighborhood as I was walking my dog. Oh
my gosh.
And it was awful. I mean, I've talked about it multiple times. And look, I don't want to put myself in this position of being like this victim who's looking for empathy, but it is the moment where something.
Hutch, do you have criticisms of the current state of police in the USA? Of course. Okay. I mentioned that I have a family full of cops. Let's just say, like, I don't get along with everybody in my family. Okay. I'm not hostile towards anyone, but, when I look at some people in and I'm saying like my whole family, I have like extended family. I mean, there's so many cops in my family. And there's some people where, I definitely have the thought like that person should not be given any authority. Like they will abuse that. So like, I get it. I get that there are bad cops. I'm not saying that. I just don't think that all cops are bastards. I think that's crazy. That's insane.
Very scary happened to me. And
why did that?
It wasn't just that had happened to me. It was the reaction I received from a faction of the left, okay? The social justice left, if you want to call it that, who think that, in some cases, the criminals are actually the victims and the victims are the criminals. Like, it's insane. And I don't know how big this faction is, but they're loud enough to push me away completely. And so it wasn't that had happened to me. It was the reaction of the left and how they were far more concerned with me talking about it because they felt that was stigmatizing.
Yes. So she said herself in her, why I left the left kind of blog post that she did, that she recognizes that when she's talking about the people that were criticizing her for talking about her story of sexual assault, she said in that blog post that this was a small kind of percentage of the left. And I feel like Anna is doing the thing that conservative news pundits and social media pundits do constantly, which is they take the most extreme elements of the left, which typically like skew very young, and they try to portray the entire Democratic Party as though this fringe group over here is representative of like a mainstream Democrat. And it's just not true. It's disingenuous. Maybe she thinks she's telling the truth. Maybe she doesn't, but I find it to be completely disingenuous. And she's just playing right into Glenn Beck's hands here. Because Glenn Beck has been saying the same shit for decades, like Democrats are extremists. They want to get rid of capitalism. They want to destroy they want to get rid of all police, and they want to do communism and and then she's kind of just playing right into that by referencing these fringe elements as though they're the mainstream. And it's just kind of bullshit to me.
The homeless community. I have never gone out of my way to say negative things about homeless people. I mean, people who are living out on the streets are in a lot of cases victims who need help, right?
Yes.
But I was victimized by a guy that was strung out on something, could have been meth. He was jerking around as he was walking toward me with his buddy. And
gosh, I'm so sorry. I didn't.
Yeah, it's okay. It's okay. But it took a while for me to get over that because I still have to walk my dog. And so multiple times a day, I literally have to think about that incident. And so I thought maybe it would help to talk about it. And then when I did talk about it, I totally regretted it because I was shocked at the way people reacted to me. But what that moment taught me was,
and of course, that is completely unhinged. Like if there were any leftists that were, so she says this thing happened to her, and then she spoke about her experience being assaulted on the streets of Los Angeles. She talked about it publicly, and to the extent that there were people in her mentions pushing back and being like, yo, not all homeless people are violent, okay? Like, you really shouldn't talk. Like, to the extent that that happened, if it happened, that is obviously completely deranged, right?
Was some of the characteristics of the quote unquote left that I thought were good, right? Like the kindness, the open-mindedness, the, you know, willingness to go out of your way to look out for people who need help, like that kind of stuff. There's a portion of the left that has shed those characteristics. They've taken on a more nihilistic approach to things, and they don't even believe in reforms. They just believe that everything about every political system, every program we have, every institution we have is just worthless and we need to burn it all down. Okay.
I'm not sure. Can you call that nihilism? Maybe I'm being a little nitpicky there.
So that nihilistic nature, I think, leads to a lot of really bad ideas and terrible behavior online. And that's pushing people out, pushing people away. And like,
so she's right about this. I'm not going to say she's wrong about this. We have a toxic element and it's deranged.
I mean, you look at places like Los Angeles, for instance, right? Or Cook County, which is where Chicago is. I paid very close attention to Cook County and what the election results were going to be in Cook County, because you have an influx of migrants going to Chicago, right? You have a lot of anger among the Black community in Chicago because they've been nickel and dimed by their local government.
It's crazy.
And at the same time, their mayor, Brandon Johnson, is doling out the cash for migrants and justifying it. And so they're angry. And so I'm watching all of this happen, and I'm just like, Democrats need to wake up, because more and more votes.
Okay. Chicago, cash, vouchers, migrants. Want to see what program she's talking about. They're ending a policy on January 1st. After 2 years and $500 million spent, Chicago Mayor Brandon Johnson announced Monday that the city's migrant mission would effectively end December 31st. The city's migrant shelter system will close as we know it. Both migrants and Chicagoans experiencing homelessness will have to compete for available bed space under an umbrella system designed to address housing needs for anyone in need. So they had separate facilities for migrants? There was a time earlier this year that Chicago and the state of Illinois was opening a new migrant shelter every week with buses stopping operations. The city is making massive changes. What kind of like cash assistance programs are they seeing in Chicago? Chicago provides $9,000 in rental assistance to migrants seeking temporary housing.
We are learning much more about the migrant crisis right here in Chicago. I spoke with Christina Passioni-Zayas, the city's first deputy chief of staff. She gave me insight on how the crisis is impacting the city and the state financially. Already this week, 41 buses have rolled into Chicago, and that means there are now 11,000 migrants living in shelters. 4,000 are still sleeping on police station floors and staying at the airport. Now, this is really startling. 30% of migrants here in Chicago are children. Majority of them are attending Chicago public schools. Right now, the state is footing the bill for what they call temporary housing, apartments and homes that are rented out for migrants. The state is paying on the high end $9,000 in rental assistance over a 6-month period of time. With that comes help moving in and a starter kit to furnish the apartment.
That rent lasts for 6 months, and ideally people would have started their legal process, secured legal work authorization, and then be able to sustain that apartment. And so the cost, or I guess the payment towards the landlord, is based on market rate. It's based on the configuration of the apartment, how many rooms, where it's located, all of those things. And so it kind of varies from place to place.
We ran out of time, but I did reach out to the city to see how many asylum seekers are currently taking advantage of the rental assistance program. We haven't heard back from the city on that. The city put $4 million.
So I don't think she's talking about illegal migrants. These are asylum seekers, right? That's what she's talking about.
Voters feel like they're being abandoned by the Democratic Party, economically speaking. And everyone got mad at me. Everyone's like, oh, you're anti-immigrant. I'm not anti-immigrant. I'm not anti-immigrant.
Immigrants built this country.
Yes, my parents are immigrants.
Yes.
Okay, I am not anti-immigrant. But I do have a problem with the Biden administration neglecting the border, pretending like there wasn't a migrant crisis at all, allowing these municipalities to be inundated with migrants without any federal resources to deal with the problem. And what? We're going to pretend like that's not going to cause electoral harm? Of course it is. So when you look at places like LA, there was an 11-point swing toward the Republican Party. Kamala Harris still won, LA County, but 11% toward Republicans, that's crazy in Los Angeles.
My problem with the policy there, again, look, I could be friends and debate and whatever with anyone. If it's honest, Thomas Jefferson said, question with boldness even the very existence of God, for if there be a God, he must surely rather honest questioning over blindfolded fear. Honest questioning means if I ask you a question and you present me with an answer and I'm like, I'm open to changing. You know what I mean? We don't have honest questioning. We now have got you questioning. We have cancel you questioning. And beyond that, we have this system that props up lies and a government that is willing to engage in lies. If you wanted to bring people in and open the borders the way you did, and then move people with our tax dollars on airplanes to cities where you're changing.
There's okay. So I feel like at this point, the situation is getting muddled. This idea that Biden opened the border, like you can take the position that Biden waited too long to address the influx at the border. I think like in retrospect, even at the time, it's pretty obvious that was the case. You can hold that position, but then Glenn Beck just takes it to this extreme degree over here, where he's saying that he's basically implying that there was this scheme from Biden to flood the country with migrant asylum seekers, and that's not what's going on. We have a system, we have laws on the books. You can't avoid those laws. If somebody is determined to have a valid asylum claim, then they are permitted to stay in the country while the claim is being vetted. To Biden's credit and to the Democrats' credit, they did, after waiting too long, attempt to remedy the situation with the bipartisan immigration bill. But to me, it just rings so hollow for people like Glenn Beck and Trump supporters to criticize Biden for this and not account for the fact that Donald Trump killed a bill that was negotiated over the period of like 5 months. It was chiefly negotiated in the Senate by James Lankford, this like super MAGA Republican guy. They came up with a bill to deal with this issue, which would have eased the stress on the border. It would have granted border security agents and the courts and the judges more resources to do their jobs, to adjudicate these claims, and to make it so that people aren't staying in the country for 5 to 8 years. Like they, in good faith, came up with a bill that would have addressed all this. Like you can say that they took too long. You can say that they negotiated that bill way too late, and you'd be correct, but they did. And Donald Trump killed the bill. And so now Donald Trump has full control of government. We'll see what he does at the border. The last time he was president, he kidnapped kids and did crazy. And, a kid, I don't know, how much worse can it get than kidnapping kids? It's like kidnapping someone's kid, killing them. It's like, what else is like, I guess torturing them? We'll see what he does. We'll see what their plan is. But unless you address the laws, he's going to have to let people into the country while their claims are being vetted. He's not going to be able to just shut the border down like he did during COVID because he had emergency authorization powers as president. Or maybe he'll try to invoke some antiquated law from like 1792 to give him emergency authorization to shut the border down. Maybe he does something like that. I'm not really sure, but as long as those laws are on the books, you have to let people into the country. Those are the rules.
Everything in that city. Can we have that conversation first? And part of the problem was they were saying it's not happening. Well, yes, it is. And you're doing it behind our back in the middle of the night.
Well, it's interesting because, and look, I can definitely be honest about my own flaws and my own mistakes because I bought the mainstream media narrative that there wasn't a migrant crisis.
Really?
And yeah, I did believe it. I believe because Look, I was an idiot because, I mean, who do you trust in today's media landscape?
I know.
Right? There's a lot of liars out there.
Yeah,
and when it comes to mainstream media, the fact of the matter is they do play defense more and more for the Democratic Party. And that's an issue because there was a time when that didn't happen. And so I still believed in their good faith reporting, even though it turns out, a lot of these reports would omit really important details about what's really going on. And so,
number one, Fox News is by far the most popular news agency on TV. By far, by an enormous margin. CNN and MSNBC's, their numbers are going down. So this idea that the media runs cover for quote unquote the media, you put it all in one box and just now it's this one monolith, and you say, well, the media is running cover for Democrats. It's like, well, first of all, Fox News is like enormous. Like in the aftermath of the election, like 3 out of 4 people were getting their news from Fox News. 3 out of 4 were getting their news from Fox News, who run cover for the Republican Party to a degree that you don't even see MSNBC doing for the Democratic Party. It's insane. It's insane. Look at the Dominion lawsuit if you want to see some incredible levels of pravda and propaganda. The private text messages from Tucker Carlson saying Sidney Powell's crazy, she's a lunatic, she's lying about this, and then going on air like 5 hours later and just repeating her lies. It's insane. He called Donald Trump a demon. A literal demon. And we now know that he's not being sarcastic when he says demon. He's not being metaphorical. He believes in actual demons. But on top of that, during the Biden years, the press was not super friendly to Joe Biden. They just weren't. This is just such revisionist history. They were brutal on Biden. Like they tore into him for the Afghanistan withdrawal. They tore into him for being old. Every other week, there was a new op-ed about him being old. They weren't running cover for the Biden administration. Like the news media, these companies are looking for engagement. They're looking for views. They're looking for clicks. They're looking for engagement on their videos. And so to that end, they're not loyal to any one party. I mean, you'll find like MSNBC, for example, they're going to definitely tend to be more friendly towards Democrats. But as friendly as Fox is to Republicans, no. And CNN, they are not anywhere close to MSNBC. They have plenty of MAGA surrogates on their programs every night running defense for Donald Trump.
It wasn't until Texas Governor Greg Abbott started busing or sending migrants to blue cities where that woke me up. That woke a lot of people up. And suddenly America realizes, there is a migrant crisis.
I actually think it's extraordinarily cruel to find someone who took this long trek from like Guatemala. They don't even speak the language. They don't even speak English. And you tell them, hey, get on this bus. We're going to take you to like a hotel downtown or something. And then you drive them like 1,000 miles to Chicago. Like, it's extraordinarily cruel. You're preying on an already incredibly vulnerable population, and you're putting them through this ordeal just to score political points. To me, it's just obscene. Like, there are other ways that you can call attention to a program, or to a problem rather, than by exploiting, extraordinarily vulnerable people.
Why did that wake you up?
Well, because all of a sudden you're seeing migrants sleeping on the floor in the police department in Chicago because they don't have shelter for these people, right? You're seeing, these. I love watching streams of city council meetings because that's how you understand what's really going on in these cities, right? These are real people who live there and they get their opportunity to speak.
Chicago's been an amazing thing to watch.
Wild.
Yeah.
I mean, I watch every city council meeting from Chicago because it's incredible.
Crazy. Yeah.
And for me, rather than relying on mainstream media reporting or anyone's reporting, to be quite honest with you, what I'll do is I'll go out of my way and I'll watch, the entirety of a government function, local government function. I talk to real people and I get a sense of where hearts and minds really are. And so on election night, I wasn't surprised at all. I knew what was coming. I totally knew what was coming. I knew that Cook County was going to swing, I think it's about 8 percentage points toward Republicans. I knew LA County, and this is what I was surprised about. I did not expect Donald Trump to flip 10 counties in California from blue to red. But I guess I shouldn't have been surprised about that either, because when you look at the conditions that people are living in a Democrat-controlled state, well, yeah, you can understand why people are turning their backs on the Democratic Party. You can understand why people are frustrated at the corruption, at the loss of $24 billion.
This is just insane to me, because if you look at states ranked by like levels of poverty, infant mortality, crime, gun violence, education levels, the red states are dominating in these bad conditions, just dominating. Like 9 out of 10 are going to be red states that are struggling with these issues. So I'm not saying it's not fair to point out when a city like Chicago has problems, or counties in California have problems. But this whole like, well, what did you expect to happen when you look at the conditions of the people that are living in these counties? It's like, well, look at the worst ranked states for all these other metrics. Why do you have no smoke for Mississippi here?
That was allocated to help the homeless when homelessness only exploded during that time, and that money is now unaccounted for. It was funneled to nonprofits whose executives get paid minimum.
Pondering politics, Josiah, ladies and gentlemen. What an attractive man. And I've seen him in person. Very strong stature, square jaw, just a real peach. Bro, she's so dishonest and unhinged in this conversation. She definitely likes Trump more than Dems, doesn't she? I don't know. I got to finish the rest of it. We're about halfway through. Love you, buddy. We'll see you on the pod tomorrow.
$1,000 a year. And you just see the waste, and you see the real grift. And so for people out there who are concerned about the grifters, take a good hard look at the systemic grifting that's happening right now. It's disgusting.
It is, again, I think, the problem with the public-private partnership.
100%, yes.
Stop it. These NGOs, let them raise their own money. Let them, if they're doing good, they will prosper. You know, people
Agreed.
will find them. The government just funneling millions of dollars. It's a money laundering. Ukraine, I don't know where you stand in Ukraine, but
Okay, so here are the states ranked by poverty. Number 1, Puerto Rico. Number 2, Mississippi. Number 3, Louisiana. Number 4, New Mexico. Number 5, West Virginia. Number 6, Kentucky. Number 7, Arkansas. Number 8, Alabama. Number 9, District of Columbia. Number 10, Oklahoma. Number 11, South Carolina. Number 12, Tennessee. Number 13, Georgia. Number 14, Texas. Where is her smoke? Where the is her smoke for these red controlled states that have so many of their citizens living in abject poverty? Why is it all just a conversation about Los Angeles or Chicago?
God, man, that is a money laundering system, and millions are being affected, and hundreds of thousands are in a meat grinder right now. For what?
I mean, look, I think that the UK and the US made a big mistake in discouraging Volodymyr Zelensky from continuing or engaging in peace negotiations early on in that war. So that's the strongest opinion.
What did she say?
Hundreds of thousands are in a meat grinder right now. For what?
I mean, look, I think that the UK and the US made a big mistake in discouraging Volodymyr Zelensky from continuing or engaging in peace negotiations early on in that war. So that's
Wasn't
the strongest opinion I have about what has transpired.
I know this is a talking point for a minute. Wasn't this completely debunked? This idea that it was the United States that convinced, like, they were going to surrender, and then the United States convinced Ukraine to keep fighting? This is a claim from Russia. Russia claims that U.S. ordered Ukraine to stop peace talks. It appears as though she is parroting literal Kremlin talking points right here. This is what Russia said. This is what Russia accused the West of doing.
Early on in that war. So that's the strongest opinion I have about what has transpired in Ukraine. You know, my heart goes out to the Ukrainians.
That's nice.
They're trying to defend themselves. You know, they were invaded wrongfully, obviously. But I feel that the way the United States has carried out its foreign policy, certainly, starting in the Bush years, and it's only gotten worse from that, it's not really benefiting anybody. And it's certainly not benefiting the American people, which is another reason why I think you're noticing a bit of a shift or a realignment when it comes to our political parties. And look,
it's bizarre.
Trump came in and he just kind of messed everything up in the Republican Party. And it's really weird to find myself in this place where you hear Republican voters take on this anti-war, identity.
See,
and Democratic voters take on...
The Republican Party went from Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, to please, Daddy Putin, don't nuke us. We're so sorry for what Biden is doing. Daddy Putin, please don't nuke us. Please, please. Oh my God, he said he's going to nuke us. Guys, Putin said he's going to nuke us. Oh God, here goes Biden again. He's going to make Daddy Putin nuke us. They've gone from Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, to that in 40 years.
A more pro-war, neoconservative type flavor.
Kamala speech at the convention it was like, what?
Yeah.
Are you Dick Cheney? What is that? It
Not
was
Dick
bizarre.
Cheney, but she was honored by his endorsement.
I know.
Which disgusted me,
But I think there's something to be said that I think with conservatives, the definition...
Don't forget, Glenn Beck spent years passionately defending the likes of Dick Cheney.
Of conservative, what I believe is the right definition is we look at things that are happening. What's working? Save that. Get that part out of here because it's corrupt, it's garbage, it's old think, whatever. And progressive should be, we're more anxious to move forward. Let's go. The two of those things together is what provides the balance,
Totally. You need that tension.
You need that. It's important. It's an eagle. Can't fly with just one wing. But when you look at what has happened to the conservatives, I started changing 2006. I mean, I was all for the war. I was all for
that.
I was all for it because I believed that we could change things. I was dumb enough to believe that you can hand people freedom and they want it, or it will just work. It barely works here. You know what I mean? You have to earn it. You have to want it. And I was also naive enough to think that we were the good guys.
That's a great point. I mean, look at Iran. I mean, we orchestrated a coup in Iran, which is part of the reason why, you have this theocratic, situation that we're now fighting against.
Right.
Doing regime change is not a good idea.
Not a good idea.
The U.S. should not be in the business of engaging.
You put 5 minutes ago, you were basically saying, your position ostensibly is that we should allow Russia to go in and annex Ukraine. Like, worse than cooing the government, right? Fully annexing a sovereign country. And your position ostensibly is that we should let them do it. And we shouldn't arm Ukraine. We shouldn't empower them to defend their borders. We shouldn't empower them to defend their sovereignty, because it's a meat grinder and people are dying or whatever. And then 5 minutes later, oh yeah, look what we did with the fucking Shah in Iran in the late 70s. Well, look how good that turned out. Regime change is bad. What the is this like? How do you, and they segued perfectly from Ukraine to this. How are you missing the connection here? Like, what? I don't understand this.
Engaging in regime change wars, period.
George, I don't know if you've read his farewell address. Okay. If we would just do that, we would have been fine. But the State Department for decades has been on this path of we're going to control everything. If you're a country that says we don't torture, but we'll ghost plane you to some place that will torture, you're a monster.
100%.
You're a monster.
100%. I can't believe I'm hearing you say this stuff. It's
I've said this for years. I've said
insane.
it for years. Yeah.
Wow, that's awesome.
But you have to be.
So to be clear, Glenn Beck was championing the invasion of Iraq And then by the time we got to 2006, which for those of you guys that need a history lesson, by then the war had started to become pretty deeply unpopular. There were obvious problems. We just, they didn't find any WMD. George W. Bush had done this. Some of you guys are too young to remember this, but he did this whole production where he landed on an aircraft carrier and then stood at a podium with a giant banner in the background that said mission accomplished. And he basically declared victory in Iraq. And then the whole situation exploded over there. The whole situation exploded. There was no foresight in the State Department for how to move forward after Saddam Hussein was toppled. And so you had a situation where there were thousands of Ba'athist Party members and there were thousands of cops who had guns at home who were being told by this usurping force, you're fired, you have no means to feed your family. This gave rise to a massive radicalization in the country. Islamic fundamentalists flooded in, and it turned into a complete cluster. How many thousands of service members died over there? 32,000 were wounded, nearly 4,500 were killed. They approximate, the approximations are kind of all over the place, but at the low end, 200,000 Iraqi civilians killed. By the time we got to 2006, the cracks in the foundation had given way and the whole thing had just crumbled. All of the public support for the war, there was a ton of jingoism in this country after September 11th. There was an appetite to punish the ones that hurt us, and the Bush administration very successfully very deliberately tied Iraq and Saddam Hussein to September 11th, even though they had nothing to do with each other. By the time we got to 2006, the public had begun to really turn on the Iraq war, and people were pissed. People were like, "You told us there were WMD there. What the? There's nothing there." And so for Glenn Beck to be like, "Oh, in 2006, I had this introspective moment and I changed." It's like, no, you didn't. You went with the public. So you were with the general public who were broadly behind the war in Iraq. And then when the public turned on the war, you decided to change your tune. That's not courage. That's not courage. That's just you chasing the trends. That's all that is.
Be consistent with your principles. And I think there's a lot of conservatives, and I'm so happy to see that now there are some Democrats that are doing the same thing. I was for big food. I was for big pharma. And then I saw it. Mm-hmm. And I feel like saying to Democrats, guys, you were right. Now, why have you abandoned that position? Because we would agree. We could get so much.
Is his anti-big pharma position just anti-vax, like anti-COVID vax? Is that what he means?
Done.
Can I ask you something? I'm genuinely curious what you think about this, because I started to really sour on Biden when, in my opinion, he was pretending to fight for his agenda. And part of his agenda.
When we talk about big pharma, we talk about, these pharmaceutical industries that sell life-saving medicines at exorbitant prices because they can. When we talk about big pharma, we talk about Monsanto, polluting local ecosystems, polluting local rivers. We talk about the opioid addiction epidemic and how the big pharma execs knew full well that their medicine that they were releasing into the public was highly addictive. They just blatantly lied and claimed, when OxyContin was first hitting the market, their whole thing was oh, it cures pain and it's non-addictive. They knew 1,000% that this wasn't true, and it resulted in tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of deaths. Appalachia just got ravaged by the opioid epidemic. We're not talking about Pfizer, working in concert with the US government to develop a vaccine for COVID that was tested and scrutinized by medical scientists and epidemiologists all over the world and deemed to be safe and effective. We're not talking about that. It's not what we're talking about. When we say big pharma, we're talking about something totally different.
Agenda was to allow for
Elon Moskva in my Twitch chat says the vaccine is the new Oxy. Is that a troll? I don't even know anymore. It might not be a troll. I think he might be serious here.
Our Medicare system to just simply negotiate drug prices with pharmaceutical companies.
Yeah.
Believe it or not, and this
Thank
is
God
the
it's a
most
joke. Oh my goodness.
anti-capitalist thing imaginable, right? Because capitalism, you're supposed to have competition, you're supposed to welcome negotiation.
Yes.
Our Medicare system not allowed to negotiate drug prices. So he was pursuing a provision in his Build Back Better plan that would allow for the negotiations to happen. Well, then they whittled it down to 10 pharmaceutical drugs. Oh, what can we do? This is the thing. The Democrats like to play good cop, bad cop. So you'll have the majority of the Democratic Party, in the Senate in particular, pretend like they're all on board with Biden's agenda.
This is the theory of the rotating villain. It's just so stupid. It's just so stupid. Why did it get whittled down? Well, you had senators like Manchin who had an insane amount of leverage. And this harkens back to the conversation I had with the lefty last week. There's a VOD of it on my YouTube channel, if you guys missed it. It's an entertaining debate that I had with a leftist. And, his position was that Biden should have just forced every provision that was originally in the Build Back Better. He should have just forced it. And when I ask him how they come up with these stupid plans, like blackmail Joe Manchin and threaten him with legal investigations, threaten his daughter with legal investigations. It just, if you want these more, sweeping provisions of Build Back Better to pass, what you should probably do is help more Democrats be elected in the Senate, so you don't run into a problem where you have a 50-50 Senate and you need literally every single senator. This is insanely difficult. Political parties, especially the Democratic Party, are big tents, okay? Big tents. Joe Manchin's West Virginia constituents are just not the same as the Bronx or Los Angeles County, okay? But a lot of lefties don't like hearing that the answer is no, and sometimes you just don't get what you want. And there's nothing you can do. That is the system. The system is designed to force the president to work with elected representatives in Congress to get big legislation done. That's the system. It's supposed to be difficult. The idea when the founders conceived of it was to forge consensus. It was this idea that you had to force people to forge a consensus. And then that way it would you would avoid these wild, volatile swings. So the system itself is designed to be difficult. And when you have a 50-50 Senate, now you need perfection in your party. And there's just nothing you can do about that situation, right? If you had 51 senators, maybe it's a different bill. Build Back Better, maybe that's profoundly different just because you had one extra senator. But Manchin knew he had all the leverage in the world. He used it. And people like Anna blame Biden for Manchin just representing West Virginia as a Democrat and being more moderate than the rest of the party. It's just kind of insane. Problem is, consensus should already be there in the party. I don't deal in should and shouldn'ts. I don't care about that. What is the situation? Who is the senator serving in West Virginia? What kind of constituents does he represent? What does he want in these bills? And that's the end of that's it. There's nothing you can do about that. He told Biden over and over again, I'll walk away, bro. I will walk away. I don't care. You can't threaten me with anything. You can't pressure me. You have no leverage over me. He knew that he had all the power in that situation. So yeah, he forced Build Back Better to be pared down from what it was. And it is what it is. It's not Biden's fault. It is not his fault. It's not Biden's fault. It's not. If the voters wanted a more bold Build Back Better, then they would have elected more Democrats to the Senate. But they didn't. And so we got Manchin, and that was it.
The idea of having Medicare negotiate drug
She's
prices.
blaming this is evidence that the Democrats are in bed with big pharma. It's no, it's not. It's not what this means. It means you had one senator who was stubbornly opposed to these provisions and he blocked it. That's it.
We have the same problem in the Republican Party, by the way.
And then you'll always have the bad cops who are willing to raise their hands and basically torpedo that provision. And that's essentially what happened with Senators Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema. But don't make them.
It's all a conspiracy. So most of the Democrats were opposed to these big, bold, progressive provisions. And they take turns being the bad guy. So this time Manchin was the bad guy, and then the rest of them got to pretend like they actually support these provisions because they knew that Manchin was going to fall on the sword and be the bad guy. It's not that complicated. It's not a goddamn conspiracy theory. It's not a big mystery that someone from West Virginia is going to be more moderate. You don't need this like good cop, bad cop, rotating villain, stupid conspiracy theory.
Mistake of thinking they were the only ones, because sitting on the bleachers waiting were other corporate Democrats who would step in if they needed to prevent the passage of that provision. And so I love watching Democrats celebrate themselves because now Medicare can negotiate the drug prices of 10 drugs. And sure, that's better than nothing. But I mean, I'm not going to.
It's actually a big deal that we cap the cost of insulin at $35 a month for Medicare recipients. That's a big deal. It's a huge deal. Okay. Yeah, we didn't get all of it, right? But that's a big deal. Yeah, 10 of the most popular drugs on the market. And she's just like, oh, it's pennies. It's pennies to a homeless person. Who gives a right?
Give you a reward for whittling down a policy that made sense. That's democracy. It's not enough that you think it makes sense. That doesn't mean that it should just automatically pass. You have to forge a consensus. You have to get the votes to pass the bill. And if you don't have the votes, then the bill doesn't pass in the form that it's in. And so you have to change the bill. And so you have to compromise. And that's what government is. Does he even realize what he's hearing from her? Because he just spent all this time talking about how the two sides need to start talking again. They need to start working together again. We need to start he's kind of making these like vague allusions to bipartisanship. And here she is sitting across the table from him saying, basically like, because I say that something makes sense, it automatically should pass in the Congress. And if it doesn't, that means that there's a conspiracy theory to do like a good cop, bad cop, rotating villain. Save taxpayers in this country a lot of money.
I think we could come.
That's the most frustrating like problem that I have with populist leftists in alternative media, because it's so easy, to get up there and be like, everybody deserves health care. Oh, thank you. Finally, someone said it right. Like, Medicare should be able to negotiate the price of all drugs and lower the prescription costs for all seniors. Oh my God. Thank you so much for that insight. We need to raise the minimum wage to $50 an hour. Oh my God. Finally, somebody said it. God, thank God for you to be here to set us on our moral compass, right? There's no conversation about like, okay, well, how do we get these done? How do we get these bills done? Great. I agree with you. I don't know about $50 an hour minimum wage. That's kind of intense, but I agree with you. Everyone should have health care. I agree with you. Medicare they should be able to negotiate the prices of all of these drugs, right? Or we should expand Medicare to I agree with you. Okay. But there's no conversation about like, well, how do we get it done? We're going to need to get the votes for that, right? That's going to be tough. Like that's going to be really tough to whip those votes. So how are we going to do? There's no conversation about that. And their explanation for why it doesn't happen is always just like, it's big pharma, the corporations, the 1% of the 1%. It's always these like wildly simplistic, oftentimes conspiratorial explanations for why it doesn't get done. And it's just, it's not enough to want things. It's not enough to want things. Okay. I want healthcare for everybody. I do. I swear to God, I do. But if I'm living in West Virginia, I'm voting for Joe Manchin. You know what I mean? Without question. Yeah. Sign me up. I'm not going to not vote for Joe Manchin in West Virginia. You know what I mean? You just have to contend with the fact that listen, difficult to forge consensus. It's difficult to whip votes. It's especially difficult with a 50-50 Senate. And instead of saying like, holy shit, Biden got so much done with that Congress, despite a 50-50 Senate, she manages to learn the wrong lesson from the Biden administration. She doesn't even recognize that it was crazy difficult to get you need perfect unanimity in the Senate. It has to be perfect. You can't afford to lose one Democrat during negotiations for any of these bills. And he did it 7 times on big, impactful pieces of legislation. And she's over here like, it's not enough. Meanwhile, if she was president, yeah, good luck. I want to see what a President Anna Kasparian can do with the same Congress that Biden had. Let's see what bills she could have got over the finish line. Because I'm not sure she could have gotten even a single bill done. Sorry.
To agreement on this easily.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I'm so excited about RFK. Get them out of government.
Mm-hmm.
Get them out. I don't want them anywhere around. I want our government to have that limited work of just who do you run to if the police are in part of it? You can't.
Mm-hmm.
You can't run to the press and say, hey, look, because the press no longer is protecting the little guy. They're protecting the pharmaceutical company or the government, which is the same.
The press was doing positive PR for the Democrats on this issue. As the Democrats essentially destroyed their own agenda.
On what issue? On pharma? What is she even talking about now?
Like, it was ridiculous. So I just, if you're going to run to the press to get accurate information about what's going on, I mean,
what I'm saying, though, on that is there is no good cop.
Mm-hmm.
We are a system of checks and balances. Congress and the Senate, they're all backroom deals. I talk to congressmen and senators who say, what the hell am I even doing here? We don't debate anything. We don't talk about anything. They come out and say, here it is. You have 10 minutes to read it and vote, and you're voting this way. That's there's no checks and balance. The administration, does the president work for all of these administrators, or do the administrators work for the elected guy?
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's all out of control. And the one that was supposed to watch is the media. And the media, and now with big tech, they're all part of that system.
What are we even talking about at this point? Mark Zuckerberg got dinner with Donald Trump. He basically has come out recently as just another tech libertarian. He said he regrets like cracking down on COVID misinformation or whatever. He's not in the tank for Democrats. Twitter, LOL, they're not in the tank for Democrats. Instagram, like TikTok is like filled with like, TikTok is more like burn it all down. The system sucks. To be honest with you, I can't even speak to TikTok, but like what big social media companies at this point are in the tank for Democrats? What does that even mean?
We have to find a way to go back to I really feel like if we could, have you tried turning it off and turning it back on again?
Mm-hmm.
And reset it to its factory settings?
Mm.
You know what I mean?
What does that mean?
There are things that we need that we can't.
What does this mean? What are we talking about? I don't know what that means. To a conservative, to a small government conservative, that means let's absolutely gut the administrative state and fire, 70% of the bureaucrats or whatever.
Can't cut. There are things that we've got. But we have got to, it's rotted from the inside on both sides.
Mm-hmm.
We have to, I don't want to, the American idea is right. It's great. It's to create a more perfect nation, meaning we're never going to be perfect. And the mission statement in the Declaration of Independence.
The concept of America almost entirely rests on the peaceful transfer of power. You cannot have this American system with all of its promises and all of its freedom and all of its democracy and blah, blah, blah. You can't have that without the peaceful transfer of power. And so it's impossible for me to reconcile what he's saying right now with the promise of America is good, our system is good, but still support someone like Donald Trump. Like it just doesn't make any sense to me. It's just completely contradictory.
There's nothing more inspiring from any country in the history of the world than that. I want to try to create that, knowing we'll never get there, but we can make progress towards it.
Mm-hmm.
So we can't jettison everything, but we have got to go in with, I don't even know if you can do it with surgical knives anymore because it's so big and out of control.
He's using all of this flowery language and then just going right back to the standard conservative position of the last several decades, which is just government bad, big government bad. Let's cut funding. Let's cut staff. Let's just like take it down like 90%. But he's talking about how he's, it's different now. And now there's this like populist right wing. And now, we agree on corporations, but he's going right back to the same position that right wingers have been advocating for literal decades. And it really kicked off like Reagan was the one that really kind of kicked off the current incarnation of that. You're just using like more flowery language. That's all you're doing here.
Just start chopping down reshaping the tree.
Yeah. There's been a lot of attention focused on, DOGE.
Anna, he's talking about like cutting funding for federal agencies that I'm sure you would have been like advocating for just, 5 months ago.
Right. The Department of Government Efficiency and what they're going to focus their energies on. I'm cautiously optimistic, mostly because of the fact that a lot of the conversation is focused on the Pentagon. And there's agreement on both sides of the political aisle that there needs to be a serious accounting for all of the resources that are being squandered on the Pentagon.
But that also has to happen in things that you're going to like. I mean, I believe the Pentagon is completely out of control.
Yeah, I mean, they haven't been able to pass a single audit.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
So I completely agree with that. But I believe defense is very important. You could go back and forth. But there's also stuff on the other side. We have squandered trillions of dollars. We don't even. How do we have a government that says, geez, where did we put that $2 trillion? How does that happen?
Yeah, it's crazy. It is. I mean,
I don't even know what the he's talking about.
I agree with you. I think that even when it comes to, look, I agree with programs that are meant to help the homeless. I totally am. So that's the type of, those are the types of policies. If they're effective, but there's a lot of waste because the way that those policies are being implemented in places like California isn't really meant to help the homeless. It's about funneling taxpayer money to nonprofits.
Yes.
That's what it's about. And so when we talk about waste, yeah, I'm open-minded about taking a look at these government agencies and really questioning whether these massive bureaucracies make sense, right? Whether...
She's like a butterfly. She's turning into like a small government Republican right before our very eyes here.
The money is well spent on various programs. Let's do a little bit of testing to see if these policies or these programs are even effective in carrying out what their objective is.
See, this is why I think the 10th Amendment is so important. It creates 50 laboratories. You want universal health care in Massachusetts? Have it. Do it. Vote for it. You want it in California? Have it. Do it. If it works, we'll do it. If it doesn't work, you can't just say, oh, we need bailout from the federal government. Why should I pay for something that doesn't work? You know what I mean? And if there's 50 laboratories, somebody's going to come up with something better. You know what I mean? But we have all of this federal regulation to stop people from trying things that might work, So are you consistent on that issue, though, on the idea of states' rights and allowing for the federal government to just kind of take a step back? It seems like a setup question.
No,
but
I'm
yes.
not. It's not a gotcha or anything. But mostly because in conversations with Republicans or with conservatives or anyone on the right, they tend to have this idea of states' rights when it comes to economic policies or things like healthcare, as you mentioned.
Guns.
But then it comes to some abortion. Of the more conservative social issues where they do want the federal government to be involved and have a standard. Like, for instance, there's a small but loud group of people who are on, Trump's case about not wanting to pursue a federal ban on abortion.
Right.
I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Federal government has nothing to do with it. The Supreme Court has ruled with it. I don't think you can legislate morality. I think the problem with the abortion case is on the right side. Forget about the baby for a second. Mom. Why is she in that? she is most likely not in it in this situation because she's like, I want to shout my abortion.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
They're in trouble.
Yep.
Something has happened. Something has failed. They have no framework around them to help them.
There are ways that you can tackle the issue if your goal is to reduce the amount of abortions that are being had in this country. You know, one very common sense thing that you would want to do is expand sex education and expand access to contraception. But it just so happens that the most conservative people are the ones that oppose abortion. They also oppose a lot of forms of sex education and contraception. They still believe to this day that abstinence-only sex education is a viable solution to these problems, and we know it doesn't work. We know it doesn't work. And so you see in states like Texas that have gotten rid of a lot of these sex ed programs, that have done everything in their power to bankrupt and defund Planned Parenthood, we have really predictable phenomenons that occur, which is to say you have increased levels of teen pregnancies, you have increased levels of infant mortality. Why? For what reason? Why? You know, they oppose things like Plan B medication. It's all such nonsense. Econoboy, what's up, buddy? That's because we live in a godless society, Hutch, and Trump will stop that. We'll see. I'm not optimistic. We'll see.
We cannot just say to that person, no, because they'll go someplace else.
True.
We have to care about the baby. And
what is this article? Florida educators decry the state's obsession with sex after new guidance prohibiting pictures of anatomy in health class. A new Florida law signed by Governor Ron DeSantis requires that school districts submit their sex education plans to the state for approval. And now some educators are saying the result amounts to not being able to teach the subject at all. Currently, state law requires schools to teach reproductive health lessons in grades 6 to 12 that focus primarily on sexual abstinence as the expected standard. Per the statute, districts are required to teach abstinence from sexual activity outside of marriage as the expected standard for all school-age students while teaching the benefits of monogamous heterosexual marriage. Emphasize that abstinence from sexual activity is a certain way to avoid out of wedlock pregnancy, sexually transmitted diseases, including acquired immune deficiency syndrome, and other associated health problems. Teach that each student has the power to control personal behavior and encourage students to base actions on reasoning, self-esteem, and respect for others. Listen, they are going to. It would be one thing if people could point to abstinence-only programs of years past in various states that were successful. You know, Florida maybe could convince me that this would be, a smart thing to do if they could point to examples of this working, and it never does. It never works. Never, ever, ever. It never works. Teaching kids about safe sex, teaching kids about contraception. These are surefire, predictable, established methods of reducing things like teen pregnancy and unwanted pregnancy. Abstinence-only programs that rely heavily on a religious undertone to the curriculum never work. It never works. Ever. It never works.
And the mother and help fix what's broken. When somebody is using abortion for birth control, I don't even understand your moral sense, but I understand 80%, I bet, of people who are having an abortion. There's no law that will fix that. None. We have to find the way by working reasonably with each other. You know, I went to GLAAD and met with GLAAD this years ago when Iran was throwing gays off of the rooftop. I've always been for gay marriage. I'm more libertarian. I don't care. Marry who you want. Don't tell me and my church what I have to do, and I'm not going to tell you what you have to do. And I went to GLAAD and I said, look, we could argue all day long about wedding cakes. They're throwing people off the roofs because they're gay. This will be wildly unpopular with my audience, and it will be wildly unpopular with your audience. But why don't we come together and say, we disagree on a whole bunch of stuff, but this we agree on. Life has meaning. Okay? They wouldn't do it.
Interesting. Okay.
And until we have the guts to stand up and say, look, this is going to be unpopular on my side. It's going to be unpopular on your side. But we're both reasonable. Laws, when it's a...
As I already mentioned, abortion in this country has been on the decline for literal decades. For literal decades. We know it works. We know it works. Expand access to contraception. Educate people on contraception. It already works. We know it works. We already know it works, for Christ's sakes.
Oppressive, when they're just forced on you, it feels oppressive. We have to change the hearts and minds. And the only way we're going to do that is by talking to each other
100%,
and actually looking at the problem, not just saying, oh, it's the homeless. That means, my father used to say, I'd say, Dad, I want to talk to you about God. Okay, we cannot talk about God. What do you mean? Let's call him first cause, because God means something different to you than it does me. First cause, we don't have any images in our head. So we start from there. When we say, we want to talk about abortion, it means something to you, means something to me that's deeply seated in us.
True.
We have to find our way to the compassionate core of the human experience.
How do we get there? Like, what is your suggestion?
But you're never going to agree on abortion. Okay, well, I don't know, maybe with the arc that she's currently on, who knows? We'll come back in a year and maybe she'll be like a pro-life MAGA Christian. She discovered Jesus along the way. It's possible, whatever. They're never going to agree on abortion. They're never going to agree on that. The pro-choice position is to say that this man shouldn't get to dictate reproductive health access for women who get abortions for myriad reasons. They weren't expecting a baby and they have career goals, or they're in an abusive relationship, or they're addicted to drugs, or they just feel like they can't care for a baby. There's all kinds of reasons or whatever.
I have for so long.
His position is that he thinks that his faith should be imposed on the people that share a state with him. That's what he's saying.
Waited for a fair interview on my side from somebody who doesn't agree with me. I can get fair interviews. I can get bad interviews from people who agree with me. And I don't mind somebody reporting something and me going, well, I don't think that's exactly true, but I can see how you got there. There's no such thing as it's all a setup. All of it is a setup.
Yep. And
you know it because you're on the other side. And I'm sure people on both sides right now with you. That's why before we started, the only thing I said to you was, you're in a safe zone. I'm not trying to get you. That has to happen. And the only way that happens is back to Jefferson. Honest questioning. I really want to know how you got there. When we talk to each other and I've got an agenda. Oh, you know what? I've got some people coming over for Christmas. I know exactly. I'm going to say this and they're going to say that, and then I can get them to that. That's not honest. When you say, I'm not going to talk to you because I disagree, what I'm actually saying is, I'm smarter than you and you have nothing to teach me.
Yeah, and ironically, that's actually the dumbest way to proceed, because one thing that I have noticed is as the left kind of avoids any debate or conversation with individuals they disagree with, well, their ideas don't really get challenged, right? Your ideas get challenged in a debate, in a good faith debate. I'm not talking about,
right.
gross, rolling around in the mud type stuff. But, I like when my ideas are challenged because it forces me to consider the flaws or a blind spot that I might have.
Yes.
You know, and that's so I want to make good arguments.
I think the left is so weak right now, so easy to take apart.
Yes,
because
you're right about that.
I've been thrown up against the wall for the last 20 years saying, you're a racist, you're a bigot. You can only have that said to you if you're a good, decent person so long before you go, what am I doing that makes me appear that way? What is it? And you self-examine and you either fix or you become stronger. Mm-hmm. No one's thrown the left up against the wall. I don't think people have any idea how to defend what they think they're for.
I mean, it's interesting because I've been forced to realize this when I've been making arguments to my audience, to the left, in regard to, hey, you know what? We've implemented this criminal justice reform policy, and it's actually not working out the way we expected. We need to tweak it here, recalibrate it there, and maybe, you know, this policy could actually work out really well. Let's fix these little gaps that we see. And rather than consider that I'm coming at them in good faith because I want these policies to work, all they do is just call you a grifter. Okay,
so,
that's it.
So
and that's the thing. You can call me whatever you want. Call me a grifter if you want.
Care. Yeah.
But please try to contend with what I'm saying. Like, debate me on this. I want to have an actual exchange. If you just think that you're going to call me a grifter and move along and that's good enough, that's not good enough. Okay, that makes you look weak.
There are so many times, I've said this for years, please tell me, not that I'm wrong, tell me how I'm wrong. I want to be wrong.
Exactly.
I want to be wrong on some of these things. But we don't do that. So let me turn that question back to you.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody trusts anything.
Right.
I mean, I'm a conservative. The FBI is a danger to our society. Mm-hmm. The Department of Justice, yes, it is. And I used to be, those guys. Mm-hmm. I don't trust any of it anymore. And it's American and
what a wild thing to say. Like, the FBI, they focus on so many different like sectors of crime. They absolutely foil terrorist attacks. They target transnational gangs. They target child traffickers. They target political like terrorists. They're out there doing work all over the country. This idea that like the whole institution of the FBI is this corrupt thing that's rotted from the inside and needs to be dissolved is fucking insane to me.
Responsible to not trust blindly.
Right.
You know what I mean? But when you don't have anything and you're not even sure the people you're talking about are grounded in the Constitution, actually do not want a theocracy, do not want a fascist state, do not want a communist state. They do care and are willing to say, man, this kills me to say it, but you have the right to believe that. If you don't have that trust, how do we gain that trust back?
Honestly, we can talk about things like transparency, more accountability in the media, stuff like that. But I think a lot of what we're seeing in the country right now stems from economic frustration. And you have to think about it this way. When Americans feel like they have no stake in the game, that's where the nihilism comes from. When you feel like you have nothing to lose, that's what's going to give you the type of mentality that's going to allow you to literally shoot and kill a United Healthcare CEO in cold blood, in broad daylight. Okay, we have some real problems in this country right now.
Right, but that's.
And I'm not justifying that that happened. I'm at all.
Yeah.
But you have to think about what led someone like that guy to think it was okay to carry that out in the morning. Okay,
right, but it doesn't
in New York City.
I just want to be really, really careful because I know what you're saying, And I agree with you.
I don't know how much of it's been confirmed yet, but what people have pieced together is that he had a back injury when he was surfing one time, had bad experience with the healthcare industry, started experimenting with hallucinogens as a method to like deal with the back pain, and apparently kind of fell off the deep end after that. I'm not sure how much of it has to do with like economic anxiety. Pretty sure this guy came from a rich family.
But I want to be very clear on what you're saying. Nothing justifies.
No, I am not justifying it at all. That was murder.
Right.
And even if I have deep criticisms of our healthcare system.
Me too.
Okay, deep criticisms.
Me too.
However, the idea that carrying out vigilante justice is the solution is laughable to me. What happened yesterday did nothing to reform our healthcare system, didn't even inch us closer to it. And at the end of the day, it just led to the murder of one individual who happened to be the CEO of one of the healthcare companies. That's not going to fix or solve anything at all. So, but what I'm trying to get at is there's a reason why there has been this increase in political violence in the country, which I'm also not justifying. But I'm also not surprised by it because people feel like they have nothing to lose, or more importantly, nothing to look forward to, nothing to build upon.
So can I ask you a difficult question?
Yeah, of course.
I believe in the American way, not the system we have.
Right.
I believe in the founding ideas, and I believe we can be that. And I believe tomorrow can be brighter. And I believe my children can surpass me. It's going to be hard.
Very hard.
And
Is he crying or is there something going on in the studio? Do his eyes look kind of watery to you right now?
if we keep going this way, no. But I do have optimism. And I do believe the individual chooses to chart their course. Some people need help, assistance, whatever. We're not born on a level playing field. We're all born equal. We all have the equal chance, but some of us need some help and et cetera, et cetera. What I hear, from the left is you can't do it because that group of people are in your way. You are black, whatever color, you're a woman, you're gay, they hate you, they'll stop you. That leads you to a place of hopelessness.
I agree that there's a certain level of defeatist mentality on the left that I don't think is necessarily helpful, right? We have to think a little more strategically about what type of, systemic obstacles are standing in our way of helping people become what they want to become in life, right? Get to where they want to get to in life. Look, the Federal Reserve put out data in 2021, fourth quarter of 2021, showing that the top 1% of this country owned almost 31% of the wealth.
I know.
Whereas the bottom 50% owned like 2.3% of the wealth. Like it was insane, right? Just insane. So I give you those stats because there has been a growing problem in the country of more and more of the wealth floating to the top. And, when we talk about waste at the Pentagon, understand that one of the biggest redistributive policies that we have in this country that takes money from the bottom to the top is the money that goes to the defense contractors.
Yes.
Tiny group of people who have a lot of sway over our political system because of money in politics.
They're not going to defund defense contractors. If they're going to defund anything from the defense budget, it's going to be like foreign aid packages. It's just going to be an isolationist policy of not like meaningfully engaging on the world stage, of allowing people like Xi Jinping to invade Taiwan, or Vladimir Putin to invade his neighboring countries, or Kim Jong-un to potentially like launch some kind of a military campaign in South Korea. It's not going to come out of the pot. Like, we're not going to like defund our military industrial complex. This idea that this is going to, maybe I'm wrong, maybe this will age like milk, but we'll see.
Yep.
And so our money gets redistributed from the lower end of the socioeconomic ladder, the tax-paying, hardworking Americans, to this tiny group of executives.
But I would say also, I'm not on the low end of the scale.
Yeah.
Also for me.
Yeah,
mean,
exactly. Middle class. I mean, it's getting harder and harder for people to hold on to middle class status.
Yeah.
And I understand the frustration and anger in the country. I mean, I feel it time to time when you see what's going on. And so you think about the federal minimum wage, it's $7.25. I did the calculation earlier today because I was curious, like, what's the exact amount of money? I mean, you're barely making like $13,000 a year with that, right? So
I hate to say this, but I'm such a states' rights guy.
Yeah.
Why should it be $7 in New York City? That's like a dime.
Well, this is the thing. I actually think the model that you see in Scandinavian countries makes a lot more sense. They don't have federal minimum wages. You know what they have? They have unionized workers who get to negotiate working conditions and their pay.
And they have wildly robust social welfare programs.
With collective bargaining, which makes way more sense. So for me, Donald Trump choosing, a pro-labor secretary was a big deal because voting in favor of the PRO Act, which does away with the intentional obstacles that prevent unionized labor from even forming, is important to me. And so I would rather have the workers.
We'll see just how pro-labor she is when the rubber hits the road. We'll see.
Have a say over what they're getting paid and what their working conditions are.
So let me push back on it because I know history. I actually think unions are important.
Yes.
I think business is important. When one side gets the thumb on the scale, it's bad.
It is.
Okay.
Yep.
And, FDR was very dead set against unionized federal workers. You cannot negotiate against yourself. Okay. And knew that would cause all kinds of problems. He was a big labor guy.
He was. Yep.
Not in the federal government. Okay. I am all for, and especially now, I mean, I'm not a universal basic income guy, but I have been saying for 10 years, we have to talk about this because there's about 10 people that all of the money is going to flow to, and you're going to be a serf and a slave for the rest of your life.
Definitely, yeah.
Because it's all going to change. So I don't know what the answer is, but I do want a gig economy. I want an economy that if I'm a mom and I only want to work these hours, I can check in when I want, limiting people's options is not good. Balancing and making sure you're not getting ripped off on either side is better.
Absolutely.
So how do you achieve that when labor unions can give so much money to politicians?
We got to get money out of politics. And I mean that. I'm not just talking about corporate interests. I'm also talking about the power that unions have, both on a local level and on a federal level with the campaign donations that they engage in, right?
But how do you do that? You have the teachers union.
Right.
Teachers union keeping kids out of school.
Right.
Because it was a union. There was no science. We now know this. How do you do that?
You have to pass. I mean, look, Cenk Uygur, through an organization that he founded called Wolfpack, has been fighting for a constitutional amendment to get money out of politics. And it wouldn't just impact corporations. It would impact any entity that engages in these current legalized bribes. And I think that's the right course of action. Now, it's difficult because you're
never going to get Glenn Beck on board with this. It's never going to happen.
Lawmakers on a local level, like states, to agree to a constitutional convention. And that's been an incredibly difficult thing to accomplish.
Or amendment.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So, and, there are a ton of Democrats who don't like the idea because they're worried that it's going to be hijacked by, Republicans and they're going to get their way. But I think that really this is the only way that we're going to fix our broken system, because otherwise all of these politicians, they're not working on behalf of the American people. They're working on behalf of the individuals who have bribed them. It's that simple. And we've seen how it's been playing out. If we do away with money in politics and we pass laws banning members of Congress from trading individual stocks, which in some cases it's obvious.
She should be outraged. She should be enraged to an extent never before experienced in her entire life, that Elon Musk funneled so much money into the Trump campaign then. There's no more egregious example of big money being involved in politics than Elon Musk, and the insane amount of influence that he was able to wield through his vast fortune. You know, you can't sit here and say we need to get big money out of politics and then like cozy up to MAGA without bringing up Elon as like the perfect example of this. It's insane that one person was able to wield that much influence. That's just insane to me. Tesla stock, what happened to Tesla stock today? Oh, looks like it's doing quite well in the last month. Jesus.
They're doing it with insider information they're getting from their closed door briefings.
No. Nancy Pelosi is just a genius.
Genius. Yeah, she just outperforms the S&P 500 consistently.
Yeah. Crazy. Well, I am thrilled that you are here.
Thank you.
And I know there's probably a zillion things we disagree on, but you.
Okay. We'll see where her story goes. I'll be paying attention to her story over the next year. I just don't know what else to say about that. Anyways.